It's such a good feeling to know you're alive. It's such a happy feeling. You're growing inside, and when you wake up ready to say, I think I'll make a snappy today. It's such a good feeling, a very good feeling. The feeling.
What do you know about Mr. Rogers?
That he was sort of like a television. He was on a television show and he tried to teach kindness to kids.
Well, he's really nice, and he lives in a neighborhood, and he has lots of friends.
He was always kind to people, and he was on TV.
Well, I knew that he had a TV show about Daniel Tiger and his neighborhood. It was like about Daniel Tiger and his friends, and there were a lot of lessons about being nice and kind to each other.
He's made up a lot of sayings like about kindness and how it's really important to the world.
He always says, I like you just the way you are.
I know that he likes to be nice to people, and he wants to make the world a better place.
He was all about kindness, and he just it was like his thing, and he really wanted the world to have kindness. He really thought it was a really good thing to the world.
My first impression was made when he was coming down to Rollins College, where we were in school together, both of us. And he was coming down from Dartmouth to take a look at Rollins, and because he wanted to be a music major. And we were asked by our professor to go and meet him and show him around. And my first impression was, geez, cute. And my second impression was, gee, he's smart. And then we went over to the college and introduced him to the music practice rooms. And he sat down and started playing some of the tunes of the day. We were coming to the end of the war at that time, and there were lots of pop stuff that we all knew and had to do it, and he could play all of them, and we couldn't because we were so square, classical music. And but while he knew classical music, he knew the good fun things too. And I thought, he's going to be popular, and he was.
When he came home from college at spring break, he saw television. His parents had one of the first televisions in Western Pennsylvania. I think this is 1949, probably, something like that. He saw television, and he was disgusted by the content on television, which was very slapstick. And television in the late 40s and 50s mostly about selling products, and the programming was often just made up on the spot. But he saw the potential of television. He was struck by what he thought was this extraordinary potential for educational purposes. That's the potential he saw. Of course, television utterly and completely changed the world over the next 50 years. But he saw it as an educational tool, not so much as a commercial tool. So he changed his plans, and he went to New York. He got an internship at NBC, spent about 3 years there, did extremely well, learned a lot of stuff. And then he got a chance to come back to Pittsburgh to WQED as the station program manager. So he was supposed to be providing all the programming. And they didn't have any programming. They didn't have any money. So the programming, they would just get whatever videotape was free that they could get from the library or from, there was one of the repositories in Washington had tons of film, and they just get film for free and show it. And the station manager, Dorothy Daniels, decided she wanted a children's program. So Fred said, I'd love to do that. I love children, I care about education. And they started a program called the Children's Corner.
The Children's Corner with Josie Carey and Fred Rogers, produced by WQED.
Why, hi, don't I know you?
And it was very successful. It won a National Sylvania Award for children's programming. Kids all across the region watched it, but Fred was unhappy with it. He was very unhappy with it because he saw it as too much like the television he had seen when he first encountered a television set. And he thought, it's fun, it's entertaining, it's not educating these kids. And it really, really bothered him and ate at him. And he then was going to the seminary, becoming a Presbyterian minister. And one of his teachers at the seminary said to him, what congregation are you headed for? Meaning what church? And Fred said, oh, I want to have a ministry to children on television. And his teacher said, well, that ain't going to happen. That's a crazy idea. But if you're interested in children, you have to go over to the University of Pittsburgh and see Dr. Margaret McFarland, because she's running one of probably the best centers on research into early childhood education in America, which was true. I mean, Benjamin Spock was there. Barry Brazelton was there. The great philosopher Erik Erikson was there at Pitt. They were all at Pitt at that time. And Fred, thanks to this teacher, got dropped into the middle of that. That gave him the rigor, the academics, the background to produce excellent television. Margaret McFarland just poured all of this great information. And that's the early 1950s, or mid-1950s, when early childhood education was just developing. I mean, if you said early childhood education to somebody back then, they thought you meant kindergarten. They didn't realize it's 2- and 3-year-olds that need education. And then what Fred gave back to those academics was, more than any other figure in America, he taught America about early childhood. He taught America how important early childhood is, because he was talking to the parents as well as the children. And so it was a great moment. I mean, without Fred Rogers, I don't think that the early childhood education movement would have come to where it's come today.
The summer that I graduated, while I was waiting to hear from graduate schools, I wandered around Pittsburgh thinking about what I might be able to do. I went to WQED, there were no jobs there, but the man who interviewed me suggested I go to Fred Rogers for some advice. What did Fred Rogers say? This was before Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, it was 1965. He said, if you're really interested in children's television, why don't you think about a master's degree? He didn't say in TV production or communication. He said, why don't you think about a master's degree in child development? And he suggested that I do it at the University of Pittsburgh, where he also had trained. So it made sense to me. I was in graduate school. He got funding for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and he asked if I would help.
Once he had the confidence, after the Children's Corner, once he had the confidence with the academics with whom he worked at Pitt to believe that he could make truly excellent television, his mind just took off. And the people who worked with him would say they could never predict what he was going to do. They could never predict that it was going to always surprise them. So, you know, there's something innate as well as what he learned that made him creative.
I think that when you work in a company where everything is based around one person, you know, Fred wrote the scripts, he wrote the music, he did the puppetry, all of those things, and he had this sense of what he wanted to have done. So the challenge was always to take that message and figure out creative ways to deliver it to the world, and particularly deliver it to the young kids in our audience. So that was the main challenge. I mean, and within that, it was, let's make sure that we use language that kids can understand. Let's make sure that the actors understand how to manipulate a puppet if they were asked to do that, or the props. Let's make sure that we do pieces that, you know, we visit people that are interesting to kids, that give them an idea of all the wonderful ways you can express yourself. So it was always just thinking about how to deliver that message to the world. I was well into producing it before I think had this epiphany one day in the studio. I'm thinking, this is so cool. This is something that is very special. But it took me a long time to really bring it to my heart.
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine?
When I was in the studio on that first day, I knew there was something really important about what Fred Rogers was doing. See, because I was, at the time, I was still in graduate school. We actually were taping at night because of Johnny Costa's schedule. He was working at KDKA at the time and could only be available at night. So I was in graduate school in the daytime, and I was learning all this complex child development theory. What does trust mean? What does ritual mean? Transition. How do you help children with aggression? How do you help them with fears? How do you help them with the difference between make-believe and reality? And here, that first night even in the studio, I could sense that what Fred was offering was something so grounded in child development, so real and so important, that it had to make a difference. It had to really matter. And I was thrilled to be a part of it, even from the very beginning. I knew it was right.
He was a producer of 900 shows. He also, he wasn't the director. He had a director, but anytime things weren't going his way, he became the director. He was the songwriter. He was the script writer. He played the piano. He did all the puppets. He hosted the show at the beginning. You can't do that and just be a nice guy. You've got to have a really depth of character that's extraordinary. And I think that's what most people don't fully understand. Even people here in Pittsburgh who knew him and tended still to sort of think of him, because he was so direct and sweet and sort of seemed a little bit innocent. He wasn't. He was very complex, and it's what I really came, as I did the research, it's one of the things I really came to love about it.
Please won't you be my neighbor? My neighbor. I have something to show you.
What made Fred and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood be such a popular program is that he was the one person that talked to those kids sincerely. You know, he believed what he was saying, and so they believed what he was saying. He was talking right into the camera, and he was talking to you. You know, you're a little kid at home. You don't realize that there are thousands of other kids watching the show at the same time. He became your friend. He became that uncle, that dad, that big brother, that neighbor who you trusted. And so I think that's what's given it its longevity. That's what people now are realizing why they liked Mr. Rogers when they were little. He was their friend.
You know, I never did crack that code, how he managed on television to be personal with children. Early on, when he was a producer in New York, he spent some time producing a show called The Gabby Hayes Show. He was actually a New Yorker, but he pretended to be a Western figure. It was sort of in the Roy Rogers Lone Ranger era. And Gabby Hayes had a children's show where he pretended to be a Western cowboy.
Well, howdy, buckaroos. This your old pal Gabby Hayes, coming at you with another one of them rip-roaring Western yarns. You're darn tootin'. Yes, sirree, Bob.
And Fred questioned Gabby Hayes a lot about how he managed to deal with the camera, because the camera seemed so impersonal, so almost off-putting. And Gabby Hayes said, Freddie, when you're looking at the camera, all you see is one little buckaroo. That's all you see. And you just make sure that camera looks like one little buckaroo, and you're talking to that one little buckaroo. And Fred cited that often by explaining how he achieved what he did. And I think he achieved it over the years. I think his conception of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood really started in the late 1950s, but he didn't get it on national television till 1968. He had a lot of years that he was working on it. But there's a certain magic to the fact that he can be on television and he's only talking to you. And there's not a lot of people on television you get that feeling from.
Hello, television neighbor. I'm glad we're together today. I wondered if you might know what this would be. A little box with some things in it. And this.
One of the other challenges of the neighborhood was just helping Fred feel comfortable in front of the camera. I mean, I know that it looks like he's talking to you, and you're that kid at home watching, and you feel like he's talking just to me. But he worked really hard to make that time conversational. Every word, pretty much for the most part, when he was talking to those kids, was scripted, so that it was meaningful and it was honest. And so that part that's taped in his house was the hardest for him to do.
Every person you meet has something that's special about him or her. You know, it's a good feeling to know that about others and about yourself. I think I'll just wear these shoes.
You know, he loved doing the puppets, but making those scenes in the house were challenges just because he wanted to get it right.
There was a little boy that he met in New York in a hotel, and the little boy came up to him with big wide eyes and said, "Mr. Rogers, how did you get out?" And that was mostly the feeling for a young child. How did he get out of that box? And he explained it to the little boy, who listened carefully. And he would nod as Fred told everything about. And at the end, he said, "How are you going to get back in?" So he was puzzled about it.
There was a boy whose name is Jeff Erlanger, and you may have seen this. And he was multiply disabled. He was in a wheelchair. And Fred had met him about 6 months earlier in Milwaukee. We were in Milwaukee doing an event, and Jeff came to it with his parents. And I set up a breakfast so Jeff could meet Fred, a big fan. Well, we came back to Pittsburgh, and about 6 months later, Fred wanted to do a program about talking about disabilities. And he said, I want to use Jeff. And the producer said, oh, well, we can find somebody here who's in a wheelchair. No, I met Jeff, and he's going to be the perfect person to talk to me about this scene.
It's a very fancy machine, but you're the one who makes it go.
Right.
Did it take a long time to learn how?
No, not really. I had other wheelchairs, and that only took... My first electric wheelchair only took me about a day to learn how to use it.
Gee, that's wonderful.
It was absolutely not edited. It was one take. And all that Fred said to the parents and to the crew was, I'm going to ask him some questions. I'm going to ask him about his wheelchair. And we might sing a song. And that's all anybody knew about it.
He said to Jeff before they started taping, let's just talk about what we're feeling. I'll ask some questions to you, and just you can tell me what you feel. And he talked about the wheelchair. Sometimes when there's somebody in a wheelchair or somebody has a disability, you talk about everything but that. And Fred asked him about what he felt about his wheelchair, and he had him describe why he's using his wheelchair. Then they sang a song together.
Do you know that song that I sometimes sing called It's You I Like?
Uh-huh.
I'd like to sing that to you and with you.
Okay, sure.
It's you I like. It's not the things you wear. It's not the way you do your hair. But it's you I like. The way you are right now. The way down deep inside you. Not the things that hide you. Not your fancy chair.
And the respect that Fred, they both had for each other. But over and above all of that, Fred didn't have to say, oh, let's do a segment on disabilities. You just did it. It was a natural conversation, and it came out, it was perfect. And I think not only is it a perfect scene, but without saying much, the viewer caught that.
That it's you I like. It's you yourself.
It's you. It's you. I like.
You know, the important thing that the behind the scenes story is that it wasn't really scripted at all. It just was what it was, and it was just so genuine and so real. And I know that Fred wrote it for a week about divorce. And it was, you might say, what does that have to do with divorce? And so one of Fred's messages about that week was, some things can be fixed and some things can't. And so, you know, Jeff had many things challenges in his life, physically and emotionally too, I'm sure, but the fact that he was never going to get out of that wheelchair. So it couldn't be fixed, but he had a wonderful outlook on life and a wonderful life. Not because of it, but in spite of it.
There were moments like that that gave you that humanness that just kind of resonated, the humanness and caring about each other and the kindness to each other. It was so real between them. And it has so many layers of messages about who we are with each other because it's so honest and so authentic.
I think the one that resonates the most to me is we did a week about mistakes. And there's this scene where Daniel Striped Tiger is telling Betty Aberlin, Lady Aberlin, that he thinks he's a mistake. And they do this beautiful duet that Fred wrote. He sings his song, she sings a song called I Think I'm a Mistake, and she sings her song that You're Just Fine. Then they sing them together.
You are big and are wild. I'm very small and quite tame most of the time.
And so to me, that really condenses the essence of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, because it's about building self-esteem, which we don't often have. It's about nobody's a mistake, that everybody has their own unique gifts to give to this world. And it takes advantage of his, not only his script writing skills, but his composition skills and his music skills. So it kind of combines everything into this just beautiful 5 or 6 minute piece in the neighborhood of Make-Believe.
I wonder if I'm just fine as you are. I'm not supposed to be scared, am I? Sometimes I cry and sometimes I shake, wondering isn't it true that the strong never break? I'm not like anyone else. No, I'm not like anyone else.
And then there were the times with the famous people around, Yo-Yo Ma or Wynton Marsalis. And that's why it's hard to name a favorite, because there are so many layers of things that were remarkable in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And the little moments when Fred would hold out a plant and say, let's take a really close look at this and let us just immerse ourselves in the visual of this magnificent piece of the world.
Isn't that a beautiful plant? That's called an African violet plant. Did you ever take a lot of time to look at a flower? Let's just take a long look at these.
Take a look at the aquarium. Do you see a dead fish? A dead fish would be one that isn't swimming or breathing or anything at all. Look down there and see.
I love the episode on death where the fish dies and the fish is floating at the bottom of the tank, and Fred explains to the children what a fish that has died looks like. And then he says, well, he's been told that sometimes if you put a little salt in the water, it can revive the fish. And he tries that and it doesn't work. And he takes the fish out, and he takes the fish outside the house to the little garden, and he gives it a burial.
When I was very young, I had a dog that I loved very much. Her name was Mitzi. And she got to be old, and she died. And I was very sad when she died, because she and I were good pals.
And all during the course of that part of the tape, the theme of the program is on death. And by the way, a television writer, producer, personality that Fred was, doing a program on death for little children? Nobody did that. The themes, he did death, he did violence, he did war, he did loss. You know, little children are terribly afraid of being lost. He did more than one program on loss. But all the time in this program on death, he's talking in such a completely honest way. He's not talking down to the children at all.
And when she died, I cried. And my grandmother heard me crying, I remember. And she came and she just put her arm around me, because she knew I was sad.
And as a grown-up, you can watch it and it's moving, and you feel what he's saying about death. He talks about when his dog died when he was little, and he wanted to keep the dog and pretend it was alive, and his father had to explain to him. It's just a beautiful piece of television, and because it is so honest and authentic for these little children, I mean, it's in language that they understand. I've watched it multiple times as a grown-up, and it isn't just useful to watch it as a biographer, it's moving to watch it.
I guess you know that I really love music. It
In fact, it's been very, very important to me since I was very little.
The music was really important to Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And primarily it was because Fred himself was a musician. He was a composer. So music was a way for him, he always said, to express his feelings.
My mom and dad didn't like me to bang when I was angry. But I found that if I played the piano when I was angry, they didn't mind that. So that's what I did. I'd play like that.
He could play through his fingers. He could play out his feelings, his anger. He could get anger, jealousy, sadness. He could get all that out and work it through at the piano.
And then little by little, I'd see that the music would be sounding less and less angry. So it seemed that the more I played, the more anger got out of me, and I felt better about everything.
Part of what he wanted to help children know is that music can be a really healthy way to express your feelings. So the music, and Fred wrote all the music. He wrote the melodies and the lyrics, and Johnny just brilliantly arranged the music. Besides the music itself, there was something really important. I remember in the very early days of Fred Rogers talking with Johnny Costa about the silence. Johnny would make music underneath so much of what Fred was doing. He would sort of lead you on and lead you to the song and help with the mood of what was going on. But it was really, really important that there would be silence. And I remember Johnny talking about how he had to discipline himself to keep his hands off the keyboard because the silence was so important to Fred.
Isn't that a strange rainbow? What do you think it needs? More colors. Right.
I think the silence was important because it really helped you think about, reflect, focus your attention. Music can be distracting too. And Fred wanted to help children appreciate silence where they could think things through. It gives you time. Everybody today is talking about mindfulness. That's the kind of thing, it's being present at the moment. Most television is afraid of silence. They're terrified that you're going to change the channel and then lose advertising dollars. And maybe that's one of the wonderful things about Fred choosing to be with public television, that he could have the luxury of those quiet times where I'm not going to say where nothing happened, because Fred Rogers considered Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood as a television visit. And so what happens in the silence is you get drawn into this. This is not just Mr. Rogers telling you things or showing you things. He's inviting you to be a part of it and engaging you in the moment. And silence gives us that opportunity to do that.
I'm very concerned that our society is much more interested in information than wonder, in noise rather than silence. How do we do that? I mean, in our business, yours and mine, how do we encourage reflection? Oh my, this is a noisy world.
What he focused on most was understanding and listening. He wanted children to learn how important it is to listen and to understand, and he wanted parents. He was always, not only through the program that he did, but he did some programming for adults too, and he wrote books, and he made speeches. And big focus for him was, we've got to listen, particularly to little children, and understand. And one of the things Fred would always do when he was talking to little children was get down on the floor with them. He wouldn't be up here talking down to them. So I think listening was a terribly important thing.
Some things you see are confusing. Some things you hear are strange. But if you ask someone to explain one or two, you'll begin to notice a change in you if you will look.
The most important lesson that I think I've learned from Fred Rogers is to listen.
Look, and listen.
So much of the time, it seems like when we're talking to somebody else and someone is saying something, we're thinking about what we can say in return, in response, instead of really listening.
He was a real listener, the best one I ever knew. You felt that interest in you, too. You didn't feel you were boring him.
I always get a question, what is the one most important thing that you can do for children, or one can do for children? And I always say, listen. And Fred says, listen to what children are saying. They'll come into a room maybe and ask you questions. So put down the paper or turn off the computer and just sit there and listen to what children are saying. That, I think, is the best advice I've ever heard. And it applies not only to children, but to adults.
Fred used to say he thought of himself as an emotional archaeologist because he loved hearing people's stories. And I've worked really hard to be a good listener. And it makes me feel better. And I'm learning more about other people because of that.
And the other thing, which you can see in the way the programs are all made, he knew how frenetic little children can be. And so he wanted to slow everything down. By the way, this is at a time when everything else in television was speeding up. You know, faster and faster, shorter frames, faster and faster action, and cutting to this and cutting to that. This is the 70s and 80s.
When you think about it, over the years, the program really didn't change that much. The pace of it didn't change that much. His way of talking or showing things did not change that much because he knew that's what was right for children.
Snow opera in the neighborhood of make-believe. Now, I wonder why real snow is always white. Flowers are all different colors. Animals are all different colors. People are different colors. I don't understand about snow.
He was not about to change because the world got faster and there was more, faster things in children's worlds and more action on other children's television. Because he knew this is what's really right for children.
And Rogers cut completely against the grain of what was happening in that day and age. So in addition to listening, I think the other major message from Fred was slow down, calm down. He was talking to little children, but he was talking to grown-ups too. And it's such a relevant message today because all of us react to what's going on in the world today with technology, with globalization, and we feel as if we got to do everything. We got to run faster. We got to get more done. And Fred's lesson was, you'll get a lot more done and you'll do it a lot better if you slow down and live in the moment. So I think that's a really important lesson from Fred to both children and grown-ups.
And I think it's fascinating that I hear today some parents are saying, I want my children to see Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood because of what it is and what it offers to children. It's so healthy.
I was always amazed that Fred had the ability to remain calm so much of the time. And I think it was because he had a discipline about things. He was able to concentrate it was just part of who he was, I think, to be able to concentrate.
He was able to be so centered and present and calm and patient because of what he went through as a little child.
He really wanted to help children because I think his childhood was hard for him. And so I think he wanted to help them over the hurdles that he had to jump when he was growing up.
And when he became a teenager and he decided what kind of person he wanted to be, he was fierce in his determination to be this kind of person. And I think he created, almost created a character, almost created Mr. Rogers. He worked on that character and he worked on that character, and he taught himself that sort of Zen quality of being in the moment.
In the studio, he had this wonderful playfulness about him that was balanced with the seriousness of what he was doing. And we saw both of those sides in the office, the thoughtful Fred and the whimsical Fred.
Fred Rogers had a great sense of humor. And it doesn't necessarily come out in the programs. I mean, it does in little whimsical things. You know, when Fred came in, he used to wear brown loafers and change into his sneakers. So there was a guy in the crew that was not much taller than I am, maybe 5'3", and he had small feet, but he always wore the exact same kind of loafers that Fred had. So one day we switched out the loafers, and so Fred's taking off his sweater, and it was at the end of the show where he's getting ready to leave, and he's putting on the shoe, and he can't get his foot in it because he wore size 9 and Jim wears like size 7 or something. So he laughed hysterically.
Oh, that's mine. Whose are these? They're Jimmy's. Oh, Jim, do you have mine on? Oh, well, that...
Oh. He knew I liked to laugh, so he would do lots of things to make me laugh. But he loved to be silly. I mean, that was, his humor was whimsical and silliness. It was never, he didn't like jokes about, say, well, I'll just say moron jokes or Polish jokes or, you know, anything that denigrated people in some way. But he just really liked being silly. So that was, and he knew I did too. So that was fun. We could be very silly and laugh a lot.
Fred Rogers never really considered himself an actor. That who he was in front of that camera was pretty much who he was in life.
Fred had a slow, measured way of speaking, a thoughtful way, and yet obviously was more casual and more conversational. But it had that same sense of, I care about you.
Because he was the same off the screen as he was on the screen. He was absolutely the same person. I only met him twice. The second time was on the street just to say hello. But the first time I had an hour-and-a-half interview with him in his office, and he was exactly the same way he was on television. And he was fun to talk to because I was the president of the Heinz Endowments, and we funded Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. So I assumed we were going to talk about money. I assumed we were going to talk about what his plans were for the program. Never, not a word. We talked about our parents, our children, where we went on vacation, Pittsburgh. Never mentioned money. He did get the grant, though.
The difference between Mr. Rogers and Fred Rogers is that he didn't change his voice. He didn't talk faster. He didn't use swear words. And I mean, he essentially was the same person, but it was about content change. He was a scholar, and he was very smart. He was a scholar. When he was with adults, he talked about adult subjects, but it was still the same quiet, thoughtful delivery.
But it was the same person. It was the same way of reacting person to person and being with us. You really felt like he cared. And I think that's, it was that slow, measured speech that was thoughtful and caring.
Fred Rogers, he also got mad. But it wasn't yelling, it wasn't screaming, it was, let's sit down and talk about this. This is not working for me. Or he got angry, he got frustrated and angry. He got angry if things weren't working right in the studio, not at any one person, just because we're not getting the work done. Or he got angry when somebody was unkind to somebody else.
The wide world seems oh so wrong, and nothing you do seems very right. What do? Do you punch a bag? Do you pound some clay or some dough?
I remember once, after a production in November, we always had a Thanksgiving dinner for all the crew. And so, for some reason, for budgetary reasons or something, an executive director of the company said, we're not going to do that this year, and he kind of canceled it. And when Fred found out, he was really angry because he said, we do that every year for them. We'll figure a way to pay for it. That he was angry just because that was us giving. That was something that people looked forward to, and it was a nice dinner. And so that's the kind of thing he would get angry about. But he didn't, it was about working it out in a civil way. And so that's probably something that people don't know, because people would ask me lots of times, does Mr. Rogers ever get mad? And it's like, yeah. I mean, he's a human being. So, yeah, he does get mad. We all get mad.
So many people have asked me, do you ever get mad? And of course I answer, well, yes. Everyone gets mad sometimes. The important thing is what we do with the mad that we feel in life.
Fred was such a great appreciator. He often did things just that you just felt were kindness from him. Sometimes it was just a note, a thank you for. Every now and then when I would make black raspberry jam in the summertime, and I'd give him some, I got this handwritten gracious note left on my chair at the office. And when he came back from the Soviet Union in 1989, he was videotaping a segment there because there was a woman there who had a children's show, and decided to make a trip to the Soviet Union. When he came back, he walked around the office in this kind of mysterious way, taking everybody's picture with his little camera. Nobody knew what he was doing, but he would just say, you know, I'm taking a picture. And then he went back to his office. And what he did was he had developed each of our pictures and pasted it. Each one of us got a poster that he had bought in Russia that in Russian said Employee of the Month. And he gave each of us this wonderful piece of Employee of the Month. It was such a wonderful atmosphere to be in because we knew that we were appreciated. We were a small group. There were only 12 or maybe 14 at the most. And there was never any sense of somebody being the favored son. We all felt that we were an important part of his team, and we each brought something that nobody else could. And his warmth to us each time, his welcoming, you had a sense that he was grateful that we were all there. And the atmosphere in the studio and the atmosphere in the office was very kind and caring. When my mother was very ill and I couldn't be at work in those couple of weeks and I had to be with her, Fred said to me, "Oh, Hedda, you're doing the most important work there is." That was the level of kindness, and he cared about each of us and really appreciated the work that we were doing with him.
There's a wonderful story that I got from Bill Eisler, who was the president of Family Communications, which is now Fred Rogers Productions, and Bill just retired. And Bill tells a story of going to New York with Fred. They were going to do a shoot, and they were walking down the street to get to the shoot. They had a unionized film crew standing there on the clock, costing money, and they passed a homeless man his back was to the wall of a stone office building. And the man said something to Fred, you know, to get him to make a contribution. And Fred put a $5 bill in the cup, but then he sat down. And he started talking to the man. And he stayed there for 20 minutes talking to this man. And Bill Eisler was going crazy, trying to get him to move, trying to get him to go to the shoot. But for Fred, that person had said something to him, so that person was important right then.
I was watching the other day one of the films, for me, the most moving of all the film clips that were shown in, it's available almost everywhere. When Fred talked to the audience, talked to his audience after 9/11.
Obviously a very disturbing live shot there. That is the World Trade Center, and we have unconfirmed reports this morning that a plane has crashed into...
He was obviously having a hard time getting that into his mind.
So right after 9/11, we decided to do these public service announcements for parents and teachers and for the adults. And we were getting ready in the studio, and I went upstairs to his office. The studio was on one floor, and we were on the second floor. And I walked in, and Fred was just, I can't even explain it. He was just so sad, so questioning. He said, "Why are we doing these? These aren't going to do any good." I panicked because he was always the one who took care of us. And I thought, how do I figure out how to convince him that this is worthwhile? And so I said to him, "Fred, how can you say that?" I said, "Don't you understand how important you are? You know that millions of people love you, and their kids love you, and they listen to you. You know, you've got to do these." And so, you know, we had a kind of a time together where he just calmed down, and I said, "I'm going to get downstairs. You know, I'll see you in 5 minutes." you can do this. This is, this is so important. People listen to you. They care about what you say. And so we did them, and that's when I remember him using the phrase, look for the helpers, which of course has become so important in these past years when there's been all of this horrible mass shootings and all of, just these storms and this terrible weather where people's lives are just torn apart. That who knew that that phrase would become so popular, and we are so glad it did.
My mother used to say a long time ago, whenever there would be any really catastrophe that was in the movies or on the air, she would say, always look for the helpers. There will always be helpers, even just on the sidelines. That's why I think that if news programs could make a conscious effort of showing rescue teams, of showing medical people, anybody who is coming into a place where there's a tragedy, to be sure that they include that. Because if you look for the helpers, you'll know that there's hope.
You can always look for the helpers. Looking for the helpers is very popular now because there's a lot of turmoil going on. But helping somebody across the street, or it's like when you look for the helpers and you're in need, it also allows you to then become that helper the next time you're in a situation, but you're on the other side.
When something happens, there's a shooting or something, right away you see Fred Rogers sayings, you'll see video of Fred, you'll see songs that Fred did, because he's an exemplar of the best values at a time when we're terrified, we're losing those values. So that makes him very relevant today. I think makes him an important cultural figure.
A lot of people say to me, what would Fred do? And that's such a hard question to answer because he approached the world in such a different way than I do. And I think that his message would always be kind, be civil, that we all can do that. There's a lot of negativity in our society today about a lot of things. And so it was refreshing to have this person say, you're unique, you're important, and to kind of give that reaffirmation that we all have kindness in us.
But the toughest thing is to love somebody who has done something mean to you, especially when that somebody has been yourself. Have you ever done anything mean to yourself? Well, it's very important to look inside yourself and find that loving part of you. That's the part that you must take good care of and never be mean to, because that's the part of you that allows you to love your neighbor. And your neighbor is anyone you happen to be with at any time of your life. Respecting and loving your neighbor can give everybody a good feeling.
I think for Fred Rogers, to be a good neighbor in his world meant to be kind and considerate and thoughtful, and it also meant to pay attention. What Fred cared about was personal relationships in a lot of ways, and he cared about the people who were close around him, the people he worked with, his family, the people that he saw each day when he went to the University of Pittsburgh. And so to him, being a good neighbor meant paying attention to those people, giving them time, not rushing through things, and being kind. Being kind was very important to him.
I think being a good neighbor first has to come caring about that person as a human being. But I think you can be there for people. And I think it's very important. And it's, as Fred talked about, giving your honest self is the best thing you can do. I think that's part of being a good neighbor.
I think that the program's greatest accomplishment was Fred's kindness and his need for people to understand that they do have an effect on people around them, and that kindness can be spread. So I think that his wish would always be to be kind.
To understand what love is. Many ways, many ways, many ways to say I love you. You will find many ways as you grow. My way is to come and visit with you.
I remember at one point somebody said, when we were doing some writing about Fred, somebody said, Hedda, don't make him out to be a saint. Because if you make him out to be a saint, people think he's some other kind of creature. I could never be like that. But Fred worked at this. He worked at being a listener. He worked at understanding that it's okay, you're not perfect. He worked at trying to understand, how do you deal with your feelings? What do you do with your anger? And I think that the best thing that I would hope people would take is that this stuff is, we can all move in that direction, even with kindness, with words of kindness to each other. The little moments, it's not the big stuff, it's the little moments that can matter. I can't even put it into one phrase of what I hope people would take. It's all these little moments of everyday life that really matter to each other.
There are people doing good things every single day. And I think that that's what he would want all of us to remember. So yes, we need people like Fred Rogers.
What would I like people to remember of Fred? Some of it has to do with the phrases that we heard over and over again. The one, you are special and so is everyone else in this world. That there are no perfect people, we're just human. Whatever is human can be more mentionable, and what is more mentionable can be more manageable. To be able to talk about your feelings and talk them through. That we all need to feel loved and lovable and know that we're capable of loving. Those are kind of things that we can take inside us.
I think everybody longs to be loved and longs to know that he or she is lovable. And consequently, the greatest thing that we can do is to help somebody know that they're loved and capable of loving. You've made this day a special day, you see, by just your being you. And if a person can receive that, of course it's an enhancement to them. But think of what an enhancement it is to the giver.
He was just the best at his relationship with young children. And I hope that that will live through the years. And I think it will. I think it will. It was what he aimed to do. That was what the most important task was, to be there for the little ones. He used to say, to provide a safe lap for young children.
I think a lot of the parents in America learned how important those early years were, which they didn't know, and learned how important it is to be present for children and listen to children. I think that's one huge impact he had. He really taught a whole nation how important those first few years are, how critical those first few years are. He worked with the academics who were developing the best thinking about early childhood education. And so I think, now today, if you go around the United States, go to any city, even any small city, and they have early childhood education centers. It's accepted that it's a critical piece of education. And Fred popularized it.
He was so open to other people's beliefs, and not only just open, interested. He was an intellectual person, and not only intellectual, but really passionate about things, and not just what he believed, but what others believed. He felt was so important. Oh my, don't we need him?
I know how tough it is some days to look with hope and confidence on the months and years ahead. But I would like to tell you what I often told you when you were much younger. I like you just the way you are. And what's more, I'm so grateful to you for helping the children in your life to know that you'll do everything you can to keep them safe and to help them express their feelings in ways that will bring healing in many different neighborhoods. It's such a good feeling to know that we're lifelong friends.
I think he would be absolutely amazed and thrilled at how he is being remembered. I really do. I think it's just been so remarkable. I think he would, I think that's exactly how, in his wildest dreams, he might have wished. Before I say goodbye to you all, I'd like to read this poem of Fred's. It's one you'll know from a song. It's you I like. It's you I like. It's not the things you wear. It's not the way you do your hair, but it's you I like. The way you are right now, the way down deep inside you. Not the things that hide you, not your toys. They're just beside you.
Every part of you.
But it's you I like.
Your skin, your
Every
eyes,
part of you.
your feelings.
Your skin,
Whether
your eyes,
old
your feelings,
or
whether
new.
old or new.
I hope that you'll
I
remember.
hope that you'll remember,
even when
you're feeling blue, that it's you I like. It's you yourself.
It's you. It's you I like.
It's you I like.